Do you ever wonder why they call it a blackout when you drink too much alcohol? Or why you get that feeling like a black curtain is coming down over your eyes while you sink back into the corners of your own mind, almost as if something is taking over your body? Think about the reasons why most people like to drink in the first place. For most of us, we reach for the bottle, the next hit of something, the next puff of a vape, because we're trying to get lost in something. Maybe not consciously, but on an unconscious or subconscious level. Think about why people would want to do that to themselves in the first place, especially when it comes to alcohol and that literal feeling of blacking out. We can trace back the word alcohol to its origin, al-cool, which meant a finely ground powder, like a charcoal powder that they would wear as eyeliner in ancient times. And it eventually evolved to mean the distilled nature or distilled essence of something, hence the word spirits. In other words, not only were they talking about the distillation, did I say that right? Process of how they make alcohol in the first place, but also the essence that we feel when we drink it, the altered states of consciousness. And if you're anything like me, you primarily might reach for a drink because you want to surrender control. You're tired of trying to control your life. You're tired of overthinking. You're tired of overprocessing. You just want to let loose. That's what people want when they consume substances for the most part. At least that's what I wanted. And even though I'm sober today, I know all too well the effects that substances can have on our mind, but more importantly, our ability to stay in control of our own mind, right? Because when we're not in control of our mind, that's when we're susceptible to subliminal messaging, to programming, whether that is on television, in the music that we listen to, from the people that we're observing in our everyday surroundings. And maybe even sometimes in a literal sense, especially if you're into Monarch programming lore, the MK Ultra experiments, how there was a really strong interest at one point in time, and probably still today, in secret organizations who were looking at how substances affect the psyche and how they can actually be used in programming the mind. So I'm thinking back to the MK Ultra experiments, how they used LSD to put their practitioners or the people that they were using in their studies, how they would put them in altered states of consciousness and then use things like hypnosis to sway them or program them into doing something or acting a certain way. Now, of course, MK Ultra stopped, but many people think that it continued on to Monarch programming or just got renamed into a bunch of other side projects from covert organizations. So whether or not that is true, I will let you decide. There is some great literature on the subject. I often talk about Fritz Springmeier and Cisco Wheeler on my channel. Fritz Springmeier authored a ton of books in the 90s, and Cisco Wheeler is somebody who was allegedly a victim of trauma-based mind control. And in the book, The Illuminati Formula, used to create an undetectable total mind-controlled slave, they co-authored that book together to talk about the systems that were being used in mind control, almost as if the mind was like a computer. And one of the things that they mentioned in that book that I really want to talk about today was the effect that substances can have on our minds, especially when it comes to fragmentation and programming separate identities. So if you think about the different types of substances that are out there just in your everyday life. Which again, this is not me making accusations against anyone or any organization. This is literally me showing you the patterns, how they mentioned it in a book that was as serious as the book that I mentioned. Serious as in it was making some serious, heavy accusations about how this programming is going on, but how odd it is to me to see these patterns kind of happening on a much wider scale. And it's no longer carried out in private warehouses or basements. This stuff seems to be happening on a everyday basis. And that is evidence to me when it comes to social conditioning and simply observing what people are interested in, what they're trying to do in their free time, and how they use substances when it comes to connecting with other people. And one of the biggest things that is of concern to me, we could go back to the DARE program in elementary school and how that was introduced to a lot of children in this country when we were at a young, impressionable age, with the goal being to get kids off of drugs. But what ended up happening for a lot of people is, because we were too young to probably be on that stuff in the first place, in a lot of cases, what it ended up doing was showing us exactly how to use them and telling us exactly what kind of effects that they would have on us, and then turning us into narcs that would tell on our parents or people in the community and make us afraid of them. So if you survived DARE in the 80s and 90s and you happened to catch my video about it, I did do some research on it in prior videos and found some sketchy things going on behind the scenes of the DARE program, which is probably a whole different topic of conversation in itself. But it's just interesting because the guy who was one of the co-founders of DARE, his name was Daryl Gates. So people ask, is that relation to Bill Gates, the guy who's keeps talking about depopulation agendas and how we've got too many people on the planet? That Bill Gates? Gates as in the gateway drug, the gateway experience, like Monroe gateway tapes that the CIA studied and came out with a declassified article called The Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Tapes in 1983, where they were exploring consciousness outside the realms of time and space and studying things like remote viewing and allegedly playing the gateway tapes for children because they were interested in the idea of creating psychic spies. Could this all be connected? So what I'm finding out as I keep talking about this stuff on my channel is how everything is kind of like a big web. You start talking about one thing and you kind of see how a bunch of other things start stemming back from that one thing that you're talking about. So for example, you could go back to, why are people waking up and remembering gifted and talented programs and gifted and talented memories right now? Why do they remember hearing the gateway tapes? Well, if you go back to the first gifted studies, they took place in the 1900s, where they thought that they were interested in the study of eugenics and they believed intelligence was passed down from generation to generation. So then you kind of do some digging on the internet. When I did some digging, I found Fritz Springmeier and some of his work. So those books came out in the 90s, and again, they're all alleged, but they do talk about these secret societies and how they also have an interest in eugenics and programming the mind of people at a very young age, at birth. And they mention substances on the channel. And then you look at the creation of the CIA, the 1940s, the Roswell crash and the alien tech that they had back then, the secret MK Ultra experiments in the 60s and 70s, which is also around the same time that the CIA was interested in studying Robert Monroe's work, which had to do with the study of consciousness and remote viewing and training psychic soldiers. And then flash forward 20, 30 years later, people are remembering the GATE program. People are talking about super soldiers and how they were used in these programs. And there's even podcasts out there that talk about how Northrop Grumman had a secret GATE classroom where the children were being used to telepathically pilot UFOs. No, that was on Blair White's podcast, an episode she did with Harvard UFO attorney Danny Sheehan. And my heart stopped when I heard that episode, because I was like, geez, so crazy how people who have left comments on my channel remembering this stuff, and then to hear somebody mention it in a podcast, let alone somebody who has a Harvard education, somebody who's high up in the world and probably brushes elbows with a lot of important people, especially when it comes to consciousness and disclosure. So we're starting to draw a lot of correlations, and it all seems to stem back to this idea that they, the shadow people that rule the nation, or the ones that operate like archons in the system of the matrix, have an interest in controlling consciousness in some way. And what better way to control consciousness than with the use of substances that are normalized? Now, I'm somebody who has struggled with substances throughout my lifetime, not only probably because I was in the gifted program and I remember hearing the Gateway tapes or something similar. I remember sleepwalking, flying, astral projecting from my body when I was really young, and then having dreams that felt so real, like I was really being visited by grays or aliens. Now, when you're that young, sometimes it's hard to distinguish between what was a real memory versus what is something that your unique, young, malleable brain could not process as a true memory. So that's part of why we have fragmented memories, not to mention that when we're in states of trauma, we also can't really form long-term memories. So when it comes to trying to decipher our own past, it's not like it doesn't matter. I think it's important to remember and acknowledge that certain things happen, but it can be nearly impossible to remember exactly where certain memories or mindsets came from, especially because of the brainwave states that you're in when you're so young, and how your body or how your mind stores memories to begin with, right? So at that point, for me, it becomes less about what happened to me, what did they do to me, and more about, well, what am I going to do about it now? So rather than focus on the bad things that happened to us or how we may have been used against our consent and how the GATE program and all this stuff was one big government experiment, and why do they push programs like DARE to try to get us off the sauce, and it really ends up just introducing a whole new market to this stuff, and it ends up perpetuating the war on DRUGS and putting money in the profits in the pockets of the people who are the one making these arrests and who are the ones getting some kind of financial benefit from even treating people who suffer from addiction, right? So let's think about the recovery world and probably the millions and millions of dollars that are made in recovery programs trying to save people and rehabilitate people who got lost on the sauce. So one of the reasons I'm sober is because when I was in my late 20s, I started to realize that the more that I was drinking to escape, it was like the more I kept getting older and everybody else around me was like staying the same age, right? Because I kept hanging out with the kids who were like 20, 21, 22, like still trying to figure their lives out. But because I had never moved on from that period. I was like in a perpetual state of trying to figure it out, and substances and alcohol, mainly alcohol for me, that's pretty much like the main thing I struggled with was alcohol, and then later on MJ, but alcohol being so normalized in our culture that you don't even realize that you have a problem with it, especially when other people around you are doing it. So it can be dang near impossible to even wake up to the fact that you might have a problem, because it's so natural. It's like as natural as, you know, ordering a water and drinking a water with your meal, except you're going to happy hour with your friends and it's 5 o'clock somewhere and everybody else around you is doing it, and it's something that you do on dates, and it's something that you do when you go to parties. And if you went to college, then it's something that your whole social life revolves around. So it's not to mention the glamorization of substance abuse or use by Hollywood stars. And then if you are a poet like me, you may have at some point glamorized those dark addict poet types like Edgar Allan Poe, or someone like Bright Eyes, whose whole music career revolves around being sad and having problems with addiction, like thinking of songs like I Want a Lover, I Don't Have to Love, I Want a Kid That's So Drunk He Doesn't Talk, Here's the Kid with the Chemicals, thought he said to meet him here, but I'm not sure. So you even see these patterns in our music, and because musicians are cool and we glamorize the musicians, it can also be something that we're like, oh wow, like that person has the music career that I want, they have the admiration that I want and the love that I want, and they glamorize drinking too much alcohol and how it made them sad, but they're turning that into music, so it becomes all of a sudden this really cool artistic thing. So that's kind of what happened for me. I started to notice how a lot of my favorite artists and musicians and people that I admired that had the career that I wanted were all at some point addicted to some kind of substances. So it's like, okay, maybe, you know, I'm not alone. And it's like, that's a double-edged sword in itself, because when we start to normalize things like mental illness and alcohol, the normalization of it, you know, which may have been intended to be like, it's okay to have this, other people have it, you're not alone, but it can also give lost people an entire identity. So somebody who may have been borderline, so like maybe somebody who doesn't really have that much of an interest in alcohol, but in order to fit in, I'm going to drink more all of a sudden because I'm going to fit in with the other people. And if I don't drink enough, then I can't fit in with them. And if I'm not depressed enough, I can't fit in with them. If I'm not lesbian enough, I can't be an LGBTQ. It's not enough for me to just be like, well, I've thought about a woman once or twice, but I guess that's not, you know, I guess I'm not gay enough to be in the club. But we can see how that kind of mentality can be dangerous for people who are lost souls like I was. So a person who was very impressionable, just looking for a space to belong. So especially when we're combining it with alcohol or substances, which is already going to make us more susceptible to peer pressure to begin with, but it's also going to blur our boundaries, kind of block our intuition, especially if we're talking about alcohol and how it literally creates that dark curtain that comes over our mind, so we're not in control. So it's blurring our boundaries with people, it's blocking off that spiritual connection or the connection to your intuition. You're making decisions that aren't in alignment with what you would do if you were sober, and you're experiencing peer pressure from the group because you want to fit in so bad, so you start to go along with the ideals of the group, and then before you know it, 5 years pass, 10 years pass, and then you're 27 hanging around with a bunch of 21-year-olds, which again, nothing necessarily or inherently wrong with that, but it may make you feel down on yourself when you realize that the people around you who may not struggle with substances are all graduating college, or they're going back for their masters, or they're starting a family, or they're getting married, or they're reaching these big milestones that you look at your life and you're like, I haven't reached any milestones because my whole life has been about going to happy hour and hanging out with the gang and doing what they're doing and just kind of like living in this space where it's like, okay, this is good enough for today, so this is going to be good enough for tomorrow. Or again, if you're anything like me, relying on these substances because they're helping you get through the day, and they're kind of putting, what's the way to say this? They are making existence tolerable. Because I think the other thing that is happening to a lot of people, it's not just the social conditioning that kind of makes us think that this kind of lifestyle is okay. You know, everybody's doing it. Like I said, alcohol or musicians and actors and actresses normalizing this stuff. You know, commercials during the Super Bowl where they're promoting Captain Morgan's or some kind of whiskey or something, or some kind of new alcoholic beverage that you should try. You know, mimosas at breakfast places, now they serve them at Denny's. So it's all kind of hard to escape. And then I don't know if you've ever tried to tell one of your friends that you're not going to be drinking this morning, and then they look at you like you're crazy. Like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want a drink? Why don't you want me to buy a shot? That seems like something everybody wants. Everybody wants somebody to buy them a shot. But for me, I started waking up around 27. So not only when I realized that my life was kind of stalled out and people around me who are my age were kind of moving ahead, and then I was kind of stuck behind with a lot of people who were also lost souls and in transitional states. Not only that, but I also kind of had this internal feeling like, I don't think this is good for me. Like, not only do I have a burning hole in my stomach that feels like I have an ulcer, like I'm stuffing my body with like really greasy, gross, disgusting food. I'm overweight because I keep eating crappy food when I'm drinking. My mind is feeling foggy. My hangovers are getting worse and worse. And I just can't stand these superficial conversations I have with people, or those moments where you're just going through the motions when you're at the bar and you're drinking and you're like, oh, I just wish I could find somebody to like have a good conversation with. And then, you're 6 whiskeys in, and then you see the guy at the bar who's got a book or something, and you're like, that guy looks like he's interesting. Who brings a book at a bar? Like, who's reading a book at a bar? Like, he's probably waiting for you to spark a conversation with him because he wants you to know that he's intelligent. So you go over and you talk to him and you have such an amazing conversation that you probably don't remember the next day, and that if you were actually watching yourself from a sober state of mind would look something more like like, have you ever watched 2 really intoxicated people try to have a conversation? They usually think that they're being really smooth, cavalier, but when a sober person is watching them, it's like really embarrassing, and you're like, is that how I looked? Like, yikes. So I was getting sick of having those conversations where you felt like you were really dissecting something with somebody, and you talked about how you're going to hang out and save the world together the next day, but then you wake up, you're hungover, all you have time for is a greasy sausage breakfast sandwich that's probably made from the lowest quality meat and uses God knows what animal parts in it, and you're just fueling your body with it. You got cystic acne all over your face because you're not washing it before bed because you're drinking. You're probably not brushing your teeth every day, and you're probably bumming random cigarettes from other people. Was that just me? I don't know. But I'm just saying, I know that I was in that world for a while, and there's a lot of people who are living like that on a dang near daily basis. And it does get tiring when you're a person, who's actually an intelligent person, right? You have something to offer the world, but maybe because you've been numbing yourself with substances because you think that other people don't see the world like you, or you think that there's nothing you can do about the world the way it is. You think it's a hopeless state. You think all of these conspiracies and all these things that are happening are actually real and they're in control of your life. If you mistakenly believe any of those things, it can become a really dark, hopeless world that makes you say, you know what, F it. I'm just going to keep drinking because there's nothing I can do about it, right? And I know that feeling all too well because that's how I lived and how I thought for a really long time, until one day I just woke up and was tired of it. I'm like, I don't want to live like this anymore. And honestly, it wasn't just me that didn't want to live like it. I saw a person who was sober who had a glow about them, which is something that I was missing for a long time. So part of the reason I think a lot of people stay stuck in the world of consuming substances is because they don't see any people who are sober, who are bright, who are bubbly, who are purpose-driven, who are positive, and they might see those kind of people and be, repelled by them because they're so far away from who you are at your core, that you're like, those people are full of shit. There's no way that they can be that happy. And again, that's just sometimes it's your intuition picking up on fake happiness, but a lot of times it's just projection because you yourself don't know what it's like to feel that happiness. So you mistakenly believe like, well, that person's full of crap. I know how to put on a good face too. I know how to act like I'm happy. So there's no way that person can possibly be that happy sober. No, of course not. Nah. But that's, again, how I believed at one point in my life, until the gods smiled down on me and said, Alex, we're going to put this person in your life, somebody that you trust, that you admire. And guess what? They're going to be sober. They're going to have a glow about them, and you're going to be shocked. You're going to be like, what? This is real. This guy is sober for real, and he's happy for real. So I started following this person around to meetings. I met some other sober people, and I noticed one thing in common. They all had this glow about them. And that's something that the recovery community talks about a lot too, is the pink glow, or the first 30 days of sobriety. Because oftentimes what happens, the reason we drink in the first place, like I said, is because we're craving some kind of connection. And a lot of us are so tired of these authentic, superficial connections that we have with people when we're drinking, that we can't remember the next day, that we won't act on the next day because we're too hungover, that when you get into a recovery room and you're surrounded with other people who are sober, not only are you watching them actually be happy and not have, be using those substances, but you also feel the sense of belonging, because a lot of those places are so welcoming. And I am at some point going to do a whole video about why people think AA is a cult, because I think that topic deserves its own conversation. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. But, just to piggyback off of that idea and how that applies in this video, I understand that a lot of people kind of are turned off by AA because it can be perceived to have this cult-like mentality, and people aren't necessarily wrong. But as they say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, there's a lot of value that you can gain from recovery programs, especially when the alternative is to just go on drinking until the bitter end. And you can substitute alcohol with a number of other substances too, because alcohol is not the only thing that is normalized and glamorized. Think of all the movies where it's people fighting over drugs, and they're living the street thug life, and the cops are involved, and there's romantic love scenes, and the girl that gets saved from the slumps, and all this glamorization of what for most people is a really, really tough life. And then we have stoner culture, rave culture. So we haven't even gotten into the conversation of how psychedelics and those kind of substances like plant medicine, I was going to say teach you to dissociate, or they cause you to dissociate. So they fragment the identity even more. And if we're talking and relating it to alters like we would talk about when it comes to Monarch programming and splitting the personality and reprogramming it with specific alters who are fragments of your personality programmed to do something, that whole thing is based on getting somebody to be in a dissociated state. So now we're normalizing, a whole part of our social network in the world is this rave scene where they're all just, doing specific substances, like, I don't even know what it's called, but I want to be respectful in how I talk about this, so I won't say specific names, but I'm sure if you've ever been in the rave scene, you know what's floating around those places. And then we have the new age culture, which is talking about microdosing and stuff like that, and plant medicine ceremonies. So I don't think that there isn't a time and space for any of that in a responsible way, but I think it's irresponsible when anybody's doing it, anybody's leading it, it's happening on a weekly, daily basis, whatever is happening. It's like literally mirroring what we read about in trauma-based mind control and how those substances are used. So it's putting people in dissociated states, and then whatever they're around, so like the people they're around, the behaviors they're observing in the people they're around, the music, the frequency, the colors, the TV, the messaging in the music, the subliminals, etc., that's who they're becoming. So I've done so many videos recently about cults and how to maintain your own identity through these group systems, group thinking, group ideologies, and the importance of maintaining your own emotional sovereignty and having energetic boundaries. But my point is that substances don't make that very easy for us. If anything, they make us more susceptible to getting carried away by the influence or the pendulum, the energy of the thought forms of the group. Plus, like I said, there's that very human urge to want to belong to something. So we're so quick, a lot of us are so quick to just bend our morals in order to be a part of the group. But the question I think we got to ask ourselves is like, who do you want to be? What kind of impact do you want to make in the world? Do you want to be a follower or do you want to be a leader? Because I can guarantee you the leaders of the world are not the ones who are showing up at these group events on a regular basis doing whatever everybody else is doing. They're going probably the opposite way, doing the opposite thing, and they're not afraid to stand alone. They're not afraid to do something different. They're not afraid to question the norm. And I think, I have a lot of people that watch these videos and that are on my channel, and a lot of them are really intelligent people who might consider themselves empaths, gifted kids, starseeds, in former programs like GATE or TAG or whatever. So they were on some level, may have been primed for some kind of leadership, or they were just intelligent and they naturally knew that they were here to make a difference. They naturally could see through the patterns and the kind of negative or dangerous things when it comes to the larger programs and systems that are operating in the background of society. So there's a lot of people who are naturally spotting this. And if we allow ourselves to just go along with the group and not question our decisions or our habits, and we're just kind of doing what everybody else is doing, then who's going to be the one to save this sinking ship that seems to be the world around us? And I hate to be like a negative person because I don't think that we're totally doomed. I think a lot of people think we are, though, and I think that's what is most dangerous. It's the amount of people who feel like we are doomed and the amount of people who, because they feel like we're doomed, are too afraid to stand up and take action and they severely underestimate their ability to make a difference. So like you simply being sober and doing something different, you simply not going out to the bar, maybe going to volunteer at an animal shelter instead, severely underestimating the impact that can have on the people around you. Because think of a pool of water that is still, and how you throw out a pebble out into the middle of some still water, and then there's little bubbles that radiate, wave patterns that radiate all from that one little surface area of water that you threw the pebble on, and now it's radiating out in waves all around it. And that's kind of makes me think of this concept of ley lines and grid workers, who I hear a lot of people in spiritual niches talk about how we are grid workers here. Those of us who call ourselves starseeds or empaths and know that we're here to make a difference in the expansion of consciousness on the planet. And this reminds me of something that I noticed when I first started talking about the Gifted and Talented program and this gate awakening that's happening. Everybody in my online Facebook group who is part of GATE, we're all in different states because we were trying to do like some kind of meetup, but literally we're all in different states. And then when we looked at who's where, we also realized that a bunch of us, if not all, were on ley lines. Ley lines are really powerful points on Earth's grid system that are, I think it's the electromagnetic field is stronger or different, so there's more opportunity to experience supernatural events, so like to see ghosts or aliens or portals being opened, etc. So the fact that a lot of us who were in gate, who were literally trained to be leaders and conditioned to be leaders. And now we're all living spread out on grid lines. So my question is, are we that little pebble that got thrown in the middle of a giant pond? And when we step up and we be the leader that this next generation needs, like the ones, I don't know, I always say, if we're not making changes ourselves, then who is going to? Like, we're trying to depend on all these celebrities who think that they have influence, or we're depending on the politicians who are, and you know, very clear to me that they're the front men for a lot of people. Like, why do we only have 2 political parties? You cannot separate all the, you know, issues that our nations deal with into 2 different political parties. That's why there's so many people who are like, well, I don't believe in abortion, but I don't believe in blah, blah, blah on the blue side. So it's like they believe some red and some blue. And that's why there's so many people who don't vote at all, because it's like, well, I don't want to vote for one lesser of the evil, because then I'm standing with that side and I don't believe in that side either. So it's like, I don't want to vote at all. Or you get people who become fanatics and who make complete irrational judgments about people because they say they like one policy on, you know, the red side or the blue side, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, time to, you know, hang this person out to dry and publicly, you know, verbally assassinate them because they said one thing online or they shared one meme, so now let's unfollow everybody. Like, that is all crazy to me. So my point is, you know, if we're not the ones who are going to wake up and make a change on our own, then who is? I don't know. So that's why I, you know, feel it in my soul, why I felt it in my soul to do something different, to recognize the patterns that are happening, what is happening to people when we are numbed out on substances, how we're using it as a way to pacify ourselves, because again, like, we don't believe that we can make the change. We feel like things are doomed and there's nobody that can save us, or we just fall victim to the physical dependency that happens when we consume these types of substances. So not addiction is mental, it's emotional, and it's physical. So that's why AA has a triangle. I don't know if that's the exact reason why it has a triangle, but I'm just saying there's a lot of different pillars of recovery. And I think a lot of the reason why people who are who experience some real trauma-based mind control, a lot of survivors that I've watched on different YouTube channels also end up in recovery too. And for me personally, a lot of people that I met when I was in my early stages of sobriety, like, I don't go to meetings anymore. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, and I absolutely believe that at one point they saved my life and forever changed it in a positive way. But a lot of people I met had also suffered from SA or SRA, and they have fragmented memories and things that they don't remember, and, you know, things they ultimately made them drink because they couldn't process that trauma. So part of sobriety is learning how to process our trauma, you know, head on, and not just trying to drink it away or minimize it or avoid it, because the more we resist something, the more we avoid something, the more pronounced and loud it becomes, because it's trying to get our attention. So I feel fortunate that at one point, you know, the universe, you know, events happened in my life as I believe that they were meant to, because I was supposed to wake up and see these patterns and see that how I was living my life wasn't working for me and it's not sustainable. And if I keep, you know, drinking at this rate, just like everybody else, like, just because they don't have problems and just because they can function, I'm not them. I know that I'm supposed to make a difference in some way, shape, or form. And whether that is through, you know, podcasting and sharing my truth like this, whether that is working with people one-on-one and opening their eyes to something new that's going to help them in their own personal growth, or if that's working with animals and saving them and getting them out of the shelter system, whether that is encouraging people to eat healthy food and supporting my local farmer because I don't want to continue to support big box chains. Like, I can make a difference in so many ways. I can make a difference by recycling my trash instead of just not worrying about it because somebody else is going to take care of it. So who cares if there's like a couple plastic bottles in my trash, but a couple bottles a day sped up over years' time, you're contributing to a huge, amount of pollution in our oceans that you want to enjoy, that you want your future kids and future generations to enjoy too. But if we're not cognizant of our own behaviors and we're too numbed out to get a handle on our own addictions, then maybe there is no hope for the world. I don't know. I want to believe there is hope, because I know that I was able to wake up. I know I was able to overcome these things. And I know that if you're watching my channel and you're still here, then you're definitely one of those people that is here to make a change too. So thanks for being there with me. Thanks for being a soldier in this war on consciousness and being the change that we need. Be the change that you need. And that is where I think I'm going to stop this video. And as always, if you are interested in working with me one-on-one, digging into your own astrology chart, human design chart, your genetic blueprint, or you want to explore the tools that I have on my channel to help you raise your consciousness and break away from these addictive behaviors, all of that is in the links in my description. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.